My one really quickly off the top is going to be the New York Knicks, because I think that offense is being severely undervalued right now for a couple of different reasons. They're obviously a pretty hot and cold team by nature under Thibodeau, but I think right now that they have all their pieces back, I like the acquisition of Josh Hart as well. I thought that was a little bit shrewd. Helps push pace as well with that second unit. But mainly you look at how their offensive metrics have performed over the past fortnight. They are severely underperforming in terms of output. And I think that it's just going to be a matter of time before that sort of clicks and they start getting the consistency in terms of scoring that their numbers should be hitting at the moment. And we saw a little bit of that against Utah. It'll be interesting to see how that goes against the Nets today. I'll talk about that game a little bit later specifically. They've got another game against Atlanta before we head into that All-Star break, and I think that's going to be an absolute track meet with both teams scoring for fun. But just looking at their starting five, in particular with Mitchell Robinson out of the lineup, we're talking like 130 points per 100 possessions, which is an elite number. The flip side of that, though, they're giving up like 127 points per 100 possessions, and that's like the third percentile in the league. It's just atrocious right now with Jericho Sims in there. It doesn't get better with Hartenstein in there either. They're giving up like a 65% opponent EFG percentage, which is quite literally the worst in the league for starting five rotation. So that to me leads to potential points for this team. But like I said, specifically with their offense, which I think is going to click in a pretty big way over these next couple of weeks, and a chance for us to get ahead of that. Their shot quality numbers have them in the top 10 offensively. Like I said, they're underperforming in terms of output, but that should come around today. Kate, what are your thoughts on the New York Knicks right now in terms of where they're going forward? Is this a team that you actually think is going to make any sort of noise in the playoffs, or is this just going to be the same old Knicks who kind of just flip between being the hottest team in the league and the coldest team in the league every other week?
Yeah, I'm not too confident in the Knicks going deep into the playoffs this year, just kind of as they always do. I mean, this is still the same Knicks team pretty much that we've seen over the last couple of years. I do like the addition of Josh Hart. I think he will be great off the bench for them, bring in some added offense. And to your point of this being an overs team going forward, I mean, if you think back to the beginning of the season, they were kind of an overs team early on. They played at a faster pace. Brunson really push the pace for them. And so similar to how the Knicks, they kind of go in waves of winning a ton, losing a ton, winning, like all of that. They're kind of doing the same thing in terms of their pace, how they're scoring, their efficiency, things like that. And so this is one of the times that you could capitalize on the Knicks offense being great right now, the pace that they're playing at great, and then their defense not so great. So, I mean, who cares if they win or lose the game? If you're betting the over, all you want is, points and points for the other team as well. So I think that's a great spot or a great idea kind of to keep in mind, is that we're seeing this kind of the same type of play that we saw early in the season when they were hitting a lot of those overs, and the market wasn't quite used to that early on, and maybe still isn't quite adjusted at this point either.
Yeah, I think there's probably been a bit of an overcorrection now because of that little slump that they went through where they were struggling to score consistently. And like I said, I think it's just a matter of time before we get them sort of leveling out in terms of their offensive output to match what it is that they're actually creating in terms of the looks, in particular in and around the perimeter. With Brunson and Randall obviously taking the large bulk of that. But I think the secondary scoring behind them is probably what's going to help propel them to being a little bit better offensively than what the marketplace has them rated at right now. But like I said, I'll touch on them a little bit later in the show as well, and their matchup today specifically. But you wanted to talk about the other New York team who made a splash in terms of what they did with their roster. And I think they retooled pretty impressively, all things considered. But what are you looking at with the Brooklyn Nets right now?
Yeah, this will be interesting to talk about this game because they're playing each other tonight, and we're kind of on opposing sides in terms of what we're thinking for both of these. So I thought the Nets, what they've done with the situation that they're in, I mean, you don't want to give up two all-stars, but it was time for them to kind of blow that thing up and start over. And what they got back from it, I thought was great. Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, two fabulous players. But I think what we're going to see from Brooklyn going forward is unders more so, because they've lost a lot of the scoring. I mean, KD, Kyrie, I know KD's been out for a little while, but those two, their offensive production. And then you bring in guys like Spencer Dinwiddie and Mikal Bridges who can score, but are they used to being number one options, because that's kind of where they're at right now. So it might take a little while for them to adjust to, running the show and being the go-to person. I mean, I think Mikal Bridges had 18 shot attempts in his first game with Brooklyn, and that's more than he's taken pretty much his entire time in Phoenix. So he may have some big nights and knock a ton of those down. He's fully capable of it, but it's just going to be an adjustment period from, being maybe the third or fourth option to being the number one, number two go-to guy. And then on the defensive side, Mikal Bridges was runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year last year. Cam Johnson plays decent defense. Dorian Finney-Smith is an upgrade on defense. So you're bringing in players that try on that side of the floor where, Kyrie, that wasn't quite his forte. KD's an underrated defender, I think, but obviously hadn't been in for a while. So I think we could see some unders going forward for Brooklyn, just based on the way that their roster has turned over and how it's going to kind of respond over these next couple weeks. I wouldn't say that that'll continue on for the entirety of the season, but initially that's kind of what I'm going to be looking at there.
Yeah, I completely agree that that's going to be the long-term output for this team, is just this really sort of stagnant offense at times where they kind of struggle to create consistency in terms of looks. And I think the pressure that Dinwiddie's now got on his shoulders to now go back to being a primary shot creator and playmaker versus what he was in Dallas should come to the fore. And yeah, I don't want to say concern. My only question mark right now with the Nets is, do we get them riding this sort of momentum into the All-Star break where it's a bunch of guys who have basically been cast aside and are playing with a chip on their shoulder, playing up-tempo basketball, running the floor, playing hard, hustling hard, but as a result, creating a lot more possessions and scoring opportunities, that we get a few games that go over, and then that overcorrection comes back in a big way where, like you said, we're just going to get these avalanche of unders for a team who has elite defensive talent. Like you said, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith is as good as any sort of wing trio defense you can start in this league right now. Spencer Dinwiddie is a larger guard as it is. He has the wingspan. He has the length to really disrupt on the perimeter. Nick Claxton, as we know, is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate so far. So, you couple it all, of course, with Jux Vaughn, who's a defensive-minded coach. So I think it's all going to come together really well at that end of the floor in a pretty big way, given time. But whether that comes off initially or not, I think they might just ride a little bit of momentum and a little bit of that sort of, chip on the shoulder mentality that helps them probably overperform offensively. At least that's what I'm hoping, not just for today, but I really do want them to in this next week, just so that we can buy back on that unders, like you said, in a pretty big way, because I think that's the way that ultimately it's going to fall for them. And it's unfortunate. They just, like you said, I think they did very well in getting back what they did. All things considered, when you trade a superstar, you never get back, a dollar's worth for every dollar spent. But it has left them extremely shy, I just think, of natural scoring and playmaking. And, you've got guys like Cam Johnson, who's a terrific sort of catch and shoot guy, can space the floor really well, is a good scorer in his own right. But you don't really have anyone creating for him, and he's not going to create his own shot. So that's where it sort of comes undone for them a little bit, I think. So for me, yeah, we'll touch on that game a little bit more detail, but I love the long-term unders look on the Brooklyn Nets for the fact that I think they have an elite defense, a ceiling to be an elite defensive team in the league, and their floor on offense is probably in and amongst, I think, the bottom feeders in the NBA, and we'll probably see that at some point where, things do come undone for them a little bit there.